Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to explore a deeply emotional and suspenseful story about a small family caught in a web of hidden conspiracies, painful truths, and unexpected betrayals. It's a journey through fear, courage, and the powerful bond that holds a family together when everything seems about to fall apart. From silent sacrifices to dangerous traps, this story will keep you engaged until the very last moment. If you enjoy stories filled with emotion, tension, and hope, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Hello, dear friends. One wrong move, just one step out of place, and everything she loved could disappear. When Thomas finally confronted her, she chose the most dangerous option of all. Not to fight back, not to run, but to bow her head. She apologized. She admitted fault. She played the role of someone who had lost. All of it was an act, because hidden beneath that submission was a truth buried for far too long, and a trap that had already been quietly set in motion. Behind the scenes, the police were closing in piece by piece. All it would take was one careless mistake from Thomas, one slip of the tongue. And when the name of the real mastermind finally surfaced, she broke. Because it wasn't a stranger. It was someone carrying the cold heart's family name. Someone capable of tearing apart a small family without a second thought. Would she be strong enough to stand when everything came to light? Could peace ever truly return after so much damage had been done? As danger and hope walked side by side, this fragile family held on to one another, trying to welcome a new year filled with love instead of fear. Leave your well wishes for them in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this emotional, suspense-filled story. Night fell over the town like a heavy curtain, as if someone had deliberately darkened the sky over that little house. Inside, everything was quiet. Maya slept peacefully, her small arms wrapped tightly around her old teddy bear. Her breathing was slow and even, so calm it almost hurt to watch. Huyen sat beside her daughter's bed, gently brushing her hair back. His face was still, but his eyes told another story. A fear he refused to speak out loud was growing heavier by the second. After a while, he stood and leaned against the doorframe, staring out into the dark yard. A decision, more dangerous than anything he'd ever done, was taking shape in his mind. He wasn't going to call the police yet. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood something all too well. If the person pulling the strings behind Thomas didn't step forward, then even if Thomas was arrested, the family would never truly be safe. Next time, they might not get a warning. Next time, they might lose everything. The following morning, Jay went to see Thomas on his own. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusations, just exhaustion. Deep, bone-crushing exhaustion. His shoulders slumped as if life itself had been weighing on him for too long. "I've been thinking," Jay said quietly, looking Thomas straight in the eye. "Maybe I've been too suspicious." Thomas paused, just for a moment. In that split second, something like alarm flashed across his face before disappearing behind his usual easy smile. "I told you already," Thomas replied smoothly. "I only want what's best for your family." Jay let out a tired sigh and forced a weak smile. "My family, it's falling apart. I'm scared of losing everything." That sentence changed everything. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice, filling it with fake concern. "If you trust me, I can help you." From that day on, Jay began showing up more often at Thomas's side. He talked about his worries, about Huyen's moments of doubt, about his constant fear that Maya could be hurt. Every word was carefully chosen, true enough to sound real, but misleading enough to hide his true intentions. And slowly, Thomas began to slip. He knew their schedule too well. He knew exactly which days Jay wasn't home. He even knew the route Huyen usually took to walk Maya to school, details no ordinary friend should ever know so precisely. One afternoon, at a nearly deserted drink stand on the edge of town, Thomas said casually, like he was talking about the weather, "Sometimes, if certain things just disappear, life becomes a lot easier." Jay's hand tightened around his glass. "What do you mean by that?" Thomas hesitated. Half a second. Just half a second. But long enough for the air between them to turn ice cold. "I'm just talking nonsense," Thomas said with a smile that no longer felt friendly. After that, Thomas began watching Jay more closely. His gaze sharpened. It wasn't relaxed anymore. It was the look of a predator sensing danger. Then one night, under a light drizzle, Thomas asked suddenly, "Tell me something. Are you really scared? Or are you just pretending?" The question hit like lightning. Jay looked up. Their eyes met. No masks this time. "And if I say I'm scared?" Jay asked. Thomas curled his lips into a thin smile. "Then you should pray that fear is real." It wasn't an outright threat, but it was enough to chill Jay to the bone. And then, the worst happened. The next afternoon, Maya was late leaving school. Huyen got stuck at the market when a call came in from an unknown number, claiming there'd been an emergency. Panic hit instantly. He turned his motorbike around and sped toward the school, his heart pounding. When he arrived, the gates were already locked. His stomach dropped. Behind the school, in a narrow alley, Maya stood alone, clutching her backpack. A strange man approached her, his voice gentle in a way that felt wrong. "I'm a friend of Uncle Jay," the man said. "He asked me to pick you up." Maya stepped back. "Uncle didn't tell me that." At that exact moment, Jay's voice tore through the air. "Maya!" The man froze, then bolted. Jay ran forward, dropping to his knees as he wrapped his arms around his daughter. His body shook uncontrollably, not from exhaustion but from pure terror. Maya burst into tears. "I was scared," she sobbed. Jay held her so tightly it was as if letting go for even a second would mean losing her forever. From a distance, hidden behind a line of trees, Thomas watched. There was no smile on his face, no warmth, only a cold, calculating stare, like someone assessing the result of a gamble. That night, no one slept. Huyen held Maya close, tears silently soaking into her hair. Jay stood beside them, his hand resting on his daughter's back, barely daring to move. "I set a trap," Jay said quietly, his voice heavy, "and I almost lost our child." Huyen looked at him with pain, but also determination. "From now on," she said, "there can't be a single mistake." Jay nodded. One thing was clear now. This wasn't a test anymore. This was war, and somewhere in the darkness, the person pulling the strings was still waiting. The trap had been revealed. No blood had been spilled, but the storm was only beginning. Rain fell softly that night, each drop heavy, mirroring the tension hanging over everything. After the incident with Maya, Thomas changed. His constant watchfulness faded. His sharp gaze softened. He believed Jay was truly broken, truly afraid. And that's when Thomas made his biggest mistake. Jay continued playing the role of the defeated man. He spoke less. His eyes looked hollow. Whenever Maya's name came up, his voice cracked just enough to sound real. Thomas believed he had won. One quiet night, in an old warehouse behind the village, they sat facing each other. Thomas smiled, this time without hiding anything. "You see?" he said calmly. "The more you resist, the more it hurts." Jay lowered his head, his hands clenched white against his knees. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I just want my family to live in peace." Thomas leaned back, sighing like a man relieved of a burden. "It's too late," he said. "You were just in the way." "They won't stop," Jay said softly. Thomas paused. Who? Jay asked, his voice trembling perfectly. After a few seconds, Thomas spoke slowly, each word cutting deep. Your ex-wife and the girl's grandmother. In that moment, Jay felt something inside him go still, not from shock, but from pain. He had suspected many people, but never them. Jay looked up. There was no fear left in his eyes now, only a cold, unsettling calm. Why? He asked. Thomas shrugged. Jealousy, hatred, money, he said bitterly. They can't stand seeing Huyen happy. They can't stand that girl calling you dad. Before he could say more, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Footsteps, shouting. The warehouse door burst open. Police. Thomas froze. His face drained of color as he turned to Jay in panic. You set me up. Jay stood. For the first time, he stood tall. No weakness, no fear. You let your guard down, Jay said calmly. That's when you lost. Handcuffs clicked shut, and Thomas collapsed. As the cold metal closed around his wrists, Thomas's strength vanished. His knees buckled, and his voice broke into something small and desperate. He kept repeating the same words over and over, that he was just following orders, that he was only a hired hand, that he never meant for things to go this far. We know, one of the officers said evenly, and you're going to tell us everything. In the interrogation room, the bravado Thomas once carried was completely gone. His head hung low, his shoulders shaking. Faced with undeniable evidence, he finally broke. Between sobs, he confessed to the secret meetings, the carefully planned moves, the cold instructions delivered without emotion. He spoke of promises made to him, rewards waiting on the other side if that family could be torn apart. And when he finally said their names, the room fell silent. The ex-wife, the biological grandmother, the very people who should have been protecting Maya were the ones who had tried to destroy her home. Jay felt his legs weaken, not from surprise, but from the weight of the truth. He had suspected strangers, outsiders, enemies from the shadows, but never blood. He stepped closer to Thomas. There was no rage in his eyes now, only a deep, aching sadness. You were just a pawn, Jay said quietly, used by people with poisoned hearts. Thomas looked up, tears streaming down his face. I didn't think it would go this far. But you forgot something, Jay replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. This family doesn't fear people like you. He turned and walked out without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped. Huyen was waiting. Maya stood beside her, clinging tightly to her mother's coat. The moment she saw Jay, her face lit up. She broke free and ran straight into his arms. Uncle Jay! That single word shattered the last wall he'd been holding up. Jay knelt and hugged her close, hiding his reddened eyes against her shoulder. Huyen stood beside them, tears flowing freely now, not from fear but from relief. They had protected their family. And yet, deep in Huyen's gaze, a quiet pain still lingered. The truth had been revealed, but it came with a wound that would take time to heal. The people behind it all were bound to them by blood. They had won a battle, but the scars would remain. The final afternoon of the year passed slowly, like a long exhale after weeks of holding their breath. Outside, a cool seasonal wind carried the familiar scent of damp earth. Inside the small house, for the first time in a long while, the air felt light. Thomas was gone. The web of conspiracies had been cut, at least for now. Jay stood by the doorway looking out into the empty yard. A faint smile touched his lips, not a smile of victory, but of survival. He turned and looked at Huyen and Maya sitting together. In that moment, his decision became clear. Let's celebrate the new year together tonight, he said softly. Maya's eyes sparkled. Will there be cake, Uncle? Yes, he smiled. and all your favorite food." Her laughter rang through the house, bright and unrestrained, chasing away the last shadows of fear. Jay headed into the kitchen and rolled up his sleeves. The same hands that had once trembled with panic now moved steadily, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, the rhythm of the knife on the cutting board, the gentle sizzle of oil, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt precious. In the bedroom, Maya sat on the bed swinging her legs, humming a song she'd made up herself. The melody was uneven, the lyrics innocent, but to Jay it was the most beautiful sound he'd heard all year. "Uncle, you cook so well," she called out. "Sing a little quieter," Jay teased, "or the food might get jealous." Laughter echoed through the house. Huyen stood at the kitchen doorway, watching them. The warm yellow light softened her expression, smoothing away months of tension. After a moment, she stepped forward to help, washing vegetables, setting the table. They didn't need to talk. Standing side by side was enough. "It's really over now," Huyen whispered. Jay nodded. "A year full of fear and conspiracies," he said quietly, "but we're still here." Huyen smiled, her hand brushing against his. It was a simple touch, but it said everything: trust, gratitude, relief. The table was ready, nothing fancy, just familiar dishes made with care. Maya ran in, hugged Jay from behind, and pressed her cheek against his back. "In the new year," she said seriously, "I want our family to always be together." Jay bent down, lifted her into his arms, and answered without hesitation, "I promise." Huyen watched them, her eyes shining with tears. Outside, fireworks began to crackle earlier than expected, bursts of color reflecting against the old window. Inside the house, laughter returned, soft at first, then full and free. But later that night, Jay stood alone by the window, staring at the distant lights in the sky. One question still lingered in his heart. Would this peace last? He turned back toward the table, where Huyen and Maya were laughing together. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He would protect this moment with everything he had. The small kitchen glowed under the warm yellow lamp. The table was neatly set atop the old wooden cabinet. Each dish carried the quiet care of someone who had poured love into every detail. Huyen placed the bowls and chopsticks down and smiled. It had been so long since the house felt whole. "I'll sit here," Maya said, dragging her little chair closer. "Okay," Jay replied. "You sit next to me so you don't get cold." He gently patted her head, his expression softening instantly. Maya beamed, her feet swinging, as if the entire world existed right there between them. She was the invisible thread holding everything together. Jay placed food into Maya's bowl. "I made this especially for you." She tasted it, eyes widening. "It's delicious, better than restaurants." Huyen laughed. "If you keep praising him, he'll never stop cooking." "I'll eat everything," Maya declared proudly. Her laughter filled the room, light and clear. Jay felt warmth spread through his chest, washing away the weight of the year. He served Huyen next. "You've had a long day." She paused, then smiled softly. "You always remember things like that." "They're not little," Jay replied. "They matter." Maya tilted her head. "Dad and Mom are happy?" The simple question made them both fall silent. Huyen set down her chopsticks and looked at her daughter. "Yes," she said gently. "Because we have you." Jay nodded, placing his hand over Huyen's without a word. Maya's face lit up. She grabbed both their hands and pressed them together. "Then let's always stay together." Time seemed to stop. 3 hands, one small, one medium, one large, held tight. No promises spoken, none needed. Laughter returned as Maya began talking about school. As Huyen teased Jay about seasoning the food a bit too strong, as Jay pretended to be serious and reminded Maya to eat slowly. Outside, the old year quietly faded away. Inside that small house, love continued to grow, steady, quiet, and strong enough to carry them through whatever seasons lay ahead. Maya stood between them, holding her small glass, eyes shining. Jay and Huyen stood close, so close they could feel each other's warmth without speaking. "This past year," Jay said calmly, "our family faced many trials. There were moments we thought we couldn't go on. But because of love, trust, and your support, we're still here." Huyen squeezed his hand and looked forward. "Thank you for listening to our family's story," she said softly. "No matter how fierce the storms are, love and trust can hold a home together." Maya hesitated, then spoke in her clear, childlike voice. "I wish you all a happy new year, and I hope you have a family that loves you, like mine loves me." Tears welled in Huyen's eyes. Jay kissed Maya's forehead and looked toward the audience. "A family doesn't need to be perfect," he said. "It just needs enough love to face everything together." Huyen nodded, smiling through tears. "We wish you a peaceful, warm, and hopeful new year." Maya waved excitedly. Lots of happiness. They held hands as fireworks lit up the sky outside. After all the fear, the losses, and the conspiracies, love remained. And with that belief, this family shared not just a wish, but a promise. No matter how hard life becomes, happiness can always begin again when we refuse to let go of the hands we love. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. This story follows a small family pushed to the edge by betrayal, manipulation, and hidden conspiracies. When a trusted figure named Thomas reveals his true nature, the family is forced into a dangerous game where every step could cost them everything. Through fear, sacrifice, and carefully planned deception, the truth slowly comes to light, exposing that the real threat doesn't come from strangers, but from people bound by blood. As the trap closes and the conspirators are revealed, the family manages to protect what matters most, their child and their bond with each other. In the aftermath, they try to rebuild, welcoming the new year with simple moments, warmth, and love. But even as peace returns, one question remains unanswered. When betrayal comes from within, can true peace ever last? Or is this only the calm before another storm?